The book of Exodus is the high water mark in the Old Testament. It's a foundation story of the people called the Hebrews. It begins in the land of Egypt. And remember, those Hebrews, they were called God's people. And this story of Exodus is the children of Israel. They're now stuck in a quagmire called slavery. They've been in that pit for 430 years. And things aren't getting any better. As a matter of fact, they're getting worse. These people were ancestors of Abraham. They lived as pioneers in a new land that God had given them, Palestine. Their life was devout. They were followers of Yahweh, their God. They had lots of struggles. They certainly had agonizing doubts, and they were painfully disciplined. But there was suffering, but there was also blessing. And they enjoyed worship, and they enjoyed those acts of faith. And then everything disappeared. They were plunged into slavery. Egypt became their master, and they were swallowed up, and their entire nationhood disappeared. These Egyptians, they were cruel, and they were terrible taskmasters. They had a system of religion and politics unlike anything else in civil society that you could ever find. For this empire to flourish, they needed slaves. They got slaves. They got these Hebrews carrying bricks, building pompous tombs, pyramids that reached up to the sky, canals for shipping, animal figures like a sphinx that they could bow down and worship. And they were larger than modern stadiums. These people once were free, living under the Palestinian stars, listening to the voice of God, worshiping and praising Him with their families, dreaming of a land that was greater than any of their neighbors. And then it all changed. They arrived in Egypt. And now there they are, toiling under the whips of these slave masters. And now they're cursed by those cruel rulers. They were then dehumanized, forced to become human animals, just machinery, now among these godless tyrants. Add to that, insult to injury, they didn't have any days off. They worked 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So there you have it. Beginning as a free people in Canaan, now to their slavery in Egypt. The book of Genesis is the book just before this book that I'm telling you about, and it talks about the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. And their lives were dominated by God. They lived by faith, but now in Egypt, their descendants, these people, totally different world, dominated by work. When God was their boss, they were free. When man was their boss, they were enslaved. When I read the story in Exodus, there is a surprise in this narrative. In this world of slavery, there was also a religion. These Egyptian slave drivers and their punishing whips on their bare backs, they also lived in a world of religion. Egypt was the most religious culture in history. All their art, it was just religious. All their architecture, just religious. All their temples, religious. Their tombs, they ensured an afterlife, and all the hieroglyphics in those tombs, religious. Even their politics, fully religious. And then you go to their university and their intelligence, their engineering, their mathematics, their literature, all focused on religion. And all their famous accomplishments, they're all still there intact, just as beautiful now as they were then 4,000 years ago. So much so that modern day Egypt, they boast the best tourist destination for travel agents. Everybody comes from all over the world to Egypt today. and they want to do a selfie of them in front of the pyramid, or in front of the Sphinx, or maybe the Luxor Palace, or King Tut's tomb. Or they can stand in front of the mighty Nile fertile river. And all of that was their religion. It gave order, and it also gave control. It made everything happen, from the rising and the falling of the Nile to the fertile land for the harvest and their prosperity. Those Egyptians, they spoke endlessly about their accomplishments. Everything they built was named after a god. They built temples to their gods. They addressed those temples in their prayers. But key to all their religion was their boasting. They bragged, "We did this. I did it my way." Although it was a religious society, it was also a slave society. If you want to control a person, or his family, or his society, do you know how to do it? There's no better way than through religion. That hasn't changed. You look at the countries like Syria today, Cuba, China, North Korea, they're all different, but they're no different at all. They're just like ancient Egypt. I've just told you the background of the story of the Exodus in chapter 33 through to the end, with 430 years of slavery in Egypt. And then something's going to change. God is going to single out one man. He's going to choose that man, and his name is Moses. And he's going to rescue his people, and he's going to take them out of all their misery. I don't think I would have picked him. He was an unlikely candidate for me to look at as a leader. Born of Hebrew parents, after being raised in Pharaoh's palace, he then murdered an Egyptian, and he got out by the skin of his teeth, and he fled from Egypt across a river, through a desert, to a land called Midian, and there he became a shepherd, and he ended up herding sheep. But there in that faraway land, he met his birth family, a remnant of the Jews who were his birth people, former Hebrews. They had left Palestine as refugees, and they ended up in Midian. Moses, he settles down and becomes one of them. He marries one of their girls, Zipporah, and he begins his family. His first child was called Gershom. The word Gershom means sojourner. Well, that's what Moses was. He was just a stranger, sojourner in that land of Midian. So that's what he named his son for. And then it happened. God selected Moses to lead Israel out of Egypt, out of slavery, into freedom, and into their salvation. One day he's going to be leading his sheep. Moses stumbled that day on a bush that was on fire, but it wasn't consumed. Out of the bush came a voice. It was the voice of God. And there within, he said, "Take your sandals off. This is holy ground." God chose him to be the leader. And right away, Moses shows up again in Egypt, where he was born. He's accompanied by his brother, Aaron. And they go and they're staring at the king's palace where he was raised. Now he demands from that Pharaoh this. He says, "I have come to set the Hebrew people free from slavery." Well, that request was outrageous. A shepherd from the desert demanding from the most powerful ruler on earth, "Let my people go." It happened. It happened. God raised up Moses to lead these Hebrews out of slavery. It wasn't instant. The negotiations took 8 months. Remember all the plagues? Hailstorm, frogs, Nile River becoming blood, locusts, firstborn dying. Promises made by the Pharaoh, they were soon retracted. And finally they were delivered. One day, a demoralized, unarmed, crushed society, smashed by an enslaving religion as their captives. The next day, they're free, victorious, leaving, singing, listening and giving the praises of God who had just redeemed them. And out of Egypt they marched, thousands upon thousands of them. Their slave life was now gone forever. And then in the desert waste of Sinai, God took over. And all that security and all that momentous routine back there that was forced upon these people is now being given to God. God's going to look after them. The granaries of Egypt, they're gone. All their ovens that they burned their bread in and made it, gone. Their daily allotment of food that was given to them and as a assignment, gone. But that didn't care. God provided for them a flatbread called manna. He gave them some quail, these wild birds, for protein. And he gave them water from the rock. And above all, he gave them freedom, that they could finally sing and laugh, and they could tell jokes, and they could even play tricks on Moses. And there in Sinai, living in the hot sand, facing that volcanic mountain in the Arabic desert, they began life all over again, learning what it was to be God's people, not Pharaoh's people. They discovered they were free, not slaves. They were living by faith, not by works. They were living under the blessing of God and not the tyranny of Pharaoh. 400 years they built pyramids, tombs, to hold a handful of mummified corpses. Now they can go to work building a brand new community, the new Hebrew people. So the new beginning started. Moses climbed Mount Sinai to receive God's revelation. When he returned, he came back with 10 commandments. It was a new constitution on how they were going to gear and guard themselves here on earth. And all the values of this new life in freedom was going to be in that constitution. Theirs to enjoy. No longer, after 400 years, was Pharaoh going to tell them what to do. They found a new value in one another. They had personal worth, just like you enjoy every day living here in Canada. At Sinai, they had a charter of freedom and rights, ushered in a brand new day for these Hebrews. And if you read Exodus chapter 24 all the way through to chapter 31, Moses is going to lead them. But he's going to go back up the hill again. He goes back up the mountain for more instructions dealing with the day-to-day routines that's going to support their life in worship. But then something happened. Moses didn't return. He went up the mountain, but he didn't come back. Day after day passed. No Moses. Where is he? People began to murmur. They got restless. All their lives, they had known anything but work, forced labor, no days off, scorching heat, whips that cut their backs bleeding, open sores that took weeks to heal. Then they became impatient, and the leader was gone. And then those people began to make demands. They came to Aaron, Moses' brother, who had been left in charge down the bottom of the hill. Come, they said, make us a god. Moses, the man that brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know where he's become. What's become of him? Exodus 32, verse 1. Make us a god. We're tired of waiting around. We're not waiting any longer. We haven't got anything to do day after day. We want something new. Make us a god. Can you see what's coming? We aren't going to live by faith anymore. We want to live by sight. We don't need a God that we can't see. We want to see a God that we can use. We want gods like the Egyptians had. Gods that can touch. Gods that can make things happen. Is that any different than the world that you and I live in? Do we make gods today? Make us a god. So what does Aaron do? He makes a golden calf. He boils down all the golden earrings, all the gold bracelets, all those lovely heirlooms that have been passed on from generation to generation. If any of you have anything gold, bring it to me, said Aaron, and we'll use it. We've got all that we got. And the golden calf got bigger and bigger as the gifts poured in. God stood by and just watched all this. I wonder what he's going to do. He led them out. He chose Moses. They're at the foot of Mount Sinai. Moses is gone. And now look what happens. Make us a god. God exploded, and he exploded in anger. When you forsake him, he gets your attention. Moses returns. He can't believe what's happened. He begins to intercede. He says and pleads to God, don't do what I think you're going to do. He cries out for mercy. The heart of the golden calf story is really the New Testament story of the cross. Disobedience and rebellion is replaced by forgiveness. When God gets angry, it matters to him. And when we forsake him and his forgiveness, it matters to him. Because the act of grace, God sees our stupidity when we downgrade his love. And we embrace. And we just suddenly say, well, we've got some fetishes that are better for us. We'll make a golden calf. We'll exalt it. We're going to bow down, and it's going to become our holy relic. Moses pleads with his people, and he prays that God will have mercy, and he cries for compassion. And God pleads, and the people plead, make me a god. But Moses becomes the intercessor. What Moses finally accomplishes is what Jesus accomplished there on the cross. And that was the act of atonement. Your sins are remembered against you no more. That was the heart of the story of the golden calf. As we enter this new world, 2025, we're going to face all kinds of golden calves this year. I'm going to face them, and so are you. People are going to cry out, make us a god. Disobedience and rebellion is going to be part of this new year. But I want you to remember, following close behind all these golden calves is mercy and grace. The consequences of rebellion is forgiveness. God's story is more about him than it is about us. It's God that always picks the pieces up after our disobedience. We restore nothing. We can only melt down earrings and bracelets and mold them into golden calves. Come, make us a god. That calf, he's going to take care of everything we need. And then comes the emptiness. And it's there that we're devastated. And then you begin to look at how shallow I've become. We deserve the worst, and then God comes along and supplies the best. How does this story end? Well, it's really your story and mine. There's a surprising turn in this story. Moses intercedes, mercy is received, and worship once again begins. All over. Judgment is experienced, and God's blessing again is lavished. Sin didn't have the last word. Paul told the outcome of his story to young Timothy in the New Testament. And he's speaking almost like Moses. Listen to what he said. I was treated mercifully because I didn't know what I was doing. And then grace mixed with faith. Love poured all over me. All because of Jesus. Here's a word that you can take to heart and depend on, said Paul. Jesus came into the world to save sinners, and I was the proof. I could never have made it apart from him. Deep honor and bright glory to the King of all time. One God, not a golden calf. That's my word. Immortal, invisible, ever and always. 1 Timothy 1:13. Make me a god. You don't need one. You already have one. I want you now to worship him. That's going to be the happiest new year you could ever have as we enter in to a brand new year, 2025. I hope you're going to enjoy it. Thanks for coming today.